Day one, when we started, we talked about faith to speak. And that is, how many of you were encouraged with the devotions and when you came here, faith to speak? The Bible talks a lot about mountains. And when you talk about faith to speak, I would like to put it in a term that I want to call mountain moving faith. In Mark chapter 11, it says, if anyone, truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, there's another translation that says, whoever speaks to the mountain, go and move into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he speaks will come to pass, it will be done for him. Faith to speak is knowing that God is powerful enough and He has the authority in all the world that when you speak forth His word, things will be changed. And the Jews, just like in any culture, every time you talk about certain things, there are certain jargons that you talk in a culture that everyone in the culture understands, isn't it? Okay, there are certain things that this culture understands that will never ever make sense in another culture. For example, here in the Philippines, if you're a foreigner, you probably wouldn't understand when we say, etong kasama ko may toyo sa ulo. How many of you have ever heard that? May toyo sa ulo. And the foreigner says, what does that mean? And you try to translate, there's soy sauce in the head. It doesn't make sense. How many of you know what it means pag sinabing may toyo sa ulo? This guy's crazy. That's the same way for the Jews when they talk about mountains. For us, mountain is a physical thing. It's a mountain. But for the Jews, when you say you're facing a mountain, it means you're facing an obstacle. An obstacle that you need to overcome. And most of the obstacles that we face in life, we can speak to it. It might be a financial obstacle, you speak to it, and you're going to get a breakthrough. If it's an emotional obstacle, how many of you are single? May mga single ba dito? Alam ko wala kayong mga emotional obstacles. But if you ever face an emotional obstacle, you can speak to it, and you can overcome most of it. But the question is this, what if you're facing this mountain of an obstacle, and you speak to it, and it doesn't budge? It doesn't move. What if you're facing, kahit na paulit-ulit, in the name of Jesus? Minsan talagang tinodo mo na, in the name of Jesus' name. Talagang dinoble mo na. Ayaw pa rin mag-move. What do you do? What do you do when you're facing a seemingly immovable mountain? That's what I want to talk to you about and encourage you that there is an overcoming faith that we need to be able to climb over this immovable mountain. I want to read in Genesis chapter 2, a very familiar verse for all of us about Abraham. Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac. God has a way of rubbing it in, doesn't he? Hey, take your son, your only son. Lord, I know he's my only son. I can count. 1. Your son, your only son, whom you love. God has been rubbing it in, and go to the land of Moriah. Go to the mountain of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place which God had told him. Things happened, verse 15, and the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. He had his breakthrough of the multitudes because he was able to overcome this seemingly immovable mountain. Let's look at the life of Abraham. Abraham faced 2 mountains that seemed like impossible to overcome. The first obstacle he faced was that God promised a son. But he had an obstacle, a couple of them, a big mountain. First, it was medically impossible because his wife was barren. All the doctors said she can't bear you a son. Second, they were old. He was 85 years old. Think about this. 85 years old. How many of you know at that age, it's very difficult to have children? Mag-honeymoon pa lang, papunta pa lang doon, pagod ka na, diba? Tulog na lang. I mean, that's physically so impossible. And thirdly, that's decades of failure. Imagine, decades of trying to have children, decades of failing, so it's mentally improbable. But he kept speaking. Eventually, that mountain moved, and he had a son. Now, there's another promise that God had. It progressed. God said, through your son, I will give you the multitudes. And here was where this mountain came in. The promise was the multitudes, and it was going to come through this son. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17. Here's the kind of mountain he was facing. By faith, Abraham went, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. So here was God telling Abraham, the very son of the promise, I want you to kill. If you were Abraham, you probably would have said to God, I probably would have said to God, God, he is the only way you can fulfill your promise. How many of you have ever want to have a promise from God, and you're thinking, this is the only way God can fulfill the promise? Hey, Lord, this financial prosperity you're promising, only through this deal will it come forth. And you're telling me, let go of this deal? You're trying to tell me, Lord, I'm going to get in the best school in the nation. What's the best school in the nation? Okay, wag na lang. Okay. The best school in the nation. And you're telling me not to take the entrance exam? You're telling me I'm going to get the dream job that I've been praying and fasting for, and you're telling me not to apply for it? That's the kind of mountain that he was facing, and he was faced with this mountain, and what was his response? Instead of giving up and instead of trying to do it his own way, he had a mountain climbing faith. See, sometimes, many times, God will allow us to overcome mountains with our mountain moving faith. But there are times we need a mountain climbing faith. When your mountain wouldn't move, then I would suggest get your ropes, put on your clamps, and start climbing with trust on your left hand and obedience on your right hand. And say, I will overcome by climbing this mountain. And what does that look like for Abraham? Trust and obedience. It means he obeyed immediately. In verse 3, early the next morning. Turn to your neighbor, tell them early the next morning. You know what that means? There was no hesitation. There was no negotiation. There was no excuses. There was no procrastination. He did not have delayed obedience, because delayed obedience is not obedience at all. He said, I'm going to obey immediately. I've got trust. I've got obedience. I'm going to do it right away. And then he also obeyed fully. In verse 9, in verse 10, he reached out his hand, took the knife to slay his son. This is interesting. Abraham did not leave himself an escape hatch. He did not purposely leave behind the materials for the altar. Yung pagdating doon, ay sorry Lord, naiwan ko. Pwede bang bukas na lang ulit? He did not take a secret lamb and stash a secret lamb with him, so that when it comes, he's got a replacement. There was no plan B, only the plan of God. There was no plan B, only God's plan. He was all in, obeyed immediately, and obeyed fully. No partial obedience. I want to submit to us today that there are certain things in life where victory comes only through climbing the mountain of God's testing. Sometimes as Christians, we think if it's inconvenient, if it's difficult, it's the devil. So here comes this mountain. We rebuke it in the name of Jesus. I rebuke you. Get behind me. And God is saying that mountain is something I put in there as a test. Now, how did he overcome this? How can you move with such overcoming faith? And I'll close with this. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. Here was the key. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. The word reason literally means to calculate. It means to take into account, to consider, and to think through. The idea is that you bring God into your reasoning. How many of you here have ever used a calculator before? Wala pa? Okay, let me show you. Okay. How many of you love shopping? How many of you have ever used a calculator during shopping or grocery? You go and you've got a budget. Your budget for grocery is, for example, 5,000, and you're calculating, and you want this nice dinner, and it would cost you 4,000. And you think, kaya ba? And then you think, kaya? Or maybe you're a student and you're going to pass a deadline, and you're thinking, okay, I've got 4 more days to read 200 books. Kaya? Pas ng faith, no? Diba? Kaya. And you start doing that. Here's what he did. He got the calculator. He brought in the reasoning about God, and he put into account all he knew about God. Now listen to this. At this point in Genesis 22, he had 4 encounters with God. And God gave him 4 names. First name God gave, I am Yahweh, which means I'm Lord of all. I am in control. Second encounter, I am El. It means I'm strong. I'm powerful. Third, he said, I'm Adonai, which means I'm a support, that I'm supportive of you. And fourth encounter, I'm El Shaddai, all sufficient. So at this point where he was facing this immovable mountain, he took out his calculator and he said, what do I know about God? God is Yahweh, God is El, God is Adonai, God is El Shaddai. He is in control, He is powerful, He's supportive of me, He is all sufficient. I think God can perform a miracle on my behalf, even if I don't understand what He's trying to tell me, even if it doesn't make sense. I know God can perform a breakthrough for me. And that's the kind of faith we need to have in order for us to overcome these seemingly immovable mountains. Abraham's conclusion, God can fulfill His promise in spite of this immovable mountain. Therefore, I will trust and obey. What is it that God is asking you to let go of? What is it that God is telling you to do that doesn't make sense? The question is not, will you trust and obey God? The more important question is, how much do you know God? Because an overcoming faith is the logical response from knowing who God is. Let me end with this short story about Jenny, 5-year-old cute girl, who really wanted to have pearl necklace. So one time they were in the department store and she saw this pearl necklace and she thought, I want to have that real pearl necklace, the authentic one. It was $2. And so she asked her mom, can you give me $2? The mom said, well, you have to work for it. It's going to be your birthday. Do some chores. Get out your piggy bank and save up for it, and maybe you can afford it. So that's what she did. Couple of weeks after, she did some chores. She got money from the grandma. She broke out the piggy bank, and excitedly she went back to the department store and bought this pearl necklace. And when she got it, she wouldn't take it off. She wore it everywhere. She wore it playing, she wore it in school, she wore it at bed, she wore it everywhere because it makes her feel beautiful and all grown up. She had a loving dad. Every night, he would put her to bed, tuck her in, pray for her. One night, the dad said, Jenny, do you love me? She said, yes, Daddy, you know I love you. And he said, Jenny, if you love me, can you please give me your pearls? And she said, no, Dad, not my pearls. You can take my dress. It's so nice. It would look good on you. And he said, it's okay, honey. Keep your pearls. he kept doing that for a couple of times. One time he said, can I have your pearls if you love me? And she said, no, you can get my princess doll. You can get my pony. But one particular night, he came in the room. There was Jenny, Indian leg, seated on her bed. Her lips were quivering, and tears started streaming on her cheeks. And he said, what's the problem, honey? What's the matter? She slowly looked up to the dad. And her fist, she opened it. And she said, Daddy, I love you. I'm finally giving you my pearls. At that point, the dad got the pearls, reached into his pocket, and he said, I'm just waiting for you to give this to me because I have real pearls that I want to give you. You see, too many times, we're not able to overcome because we hold on to fake treasures. In reality, God's testing us. And God is saying, let go of that, for I'm about to give you real treasures. That's what you call faith to overcome. I'm willing to let go. I'm willing to climb my mountain. I want to pray for you. Can we all stand? We're going to sing shortly just a worship song, but I want to pray for you. Can we all bow our heads and close our eyes? I really feel like coming in here, as I was praying, I feel like God will speak to some of you. For most of you, the faith to overcome, you just need to speak and be persistent in speaking it. But there's some of you here, God is saying, this is me. There's an immovable mountain that you can only overcome through trust and obedience. And I want you to let go of some things in order for you to have a breakthrough. Can we just bow our heads and close our eyes? If you're here this afternoon and you know God is speaking to you and you're like that little Jenny holding on to this, Lord, this is the only deal I would make that financial breakthrough possible. Lord, this is the only way that your promise can come to pass. You know what God is saying? God is saying, my son, my daughter, let go. I'm going to give you real treasures. It might be a relationship. It might be whatever that might be, but you know God is speaking to you. I want to pray for you. If that's you, can you lift your hand? Let me pray for you. Allow me to pray for you. Yes, many hands are raised. Can you lift both your hands to God as an act of surrender? Pray your own prayer and say, God, you are a loving Father. You will never ask me to let go unless there's something better you prepared for me. So Lord, for those of us who are facing an immovable mountain, Lord, I pray that you would give us trust and give us obedience to climb this mountain so that we can overcome. In Jesus' name.